Okay, here we go. First clap of the night on 3. 1, 2, 3. What's up, everybody? Welcome to this episode of True Crime and Cocktails. We're so glad that you're here. As always, I am your host, Lauren Ash. And as always, I am joined by my co-hostess with the mostess, Christy Oxborrow. How you feeling?
Oh, I'm jazzed.
Jazzed?
I mean, look, I told you they would never know, so I could just leave it. But I'll tell you, I told you already, I was late to getting to this record.
Yeah.
And the reason is, and this is going to be, I'm using this moment as a brag.
I love it.
So a week or so ago, we had like a little extra time between episodes. I had finished one early, or we weren't starting one yet or something. So I had like a little bit of time, and I was like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do something not work related. I'm not going to research or take notes. I'm going to do something else. And so it was my husband's birthday recently, and I bought him a bunch of like classic video games for his birthday. And we were talking about games, and I was like, like when I was a kid, original NES was my heart.
Thank you.
And so he's like, hey, next time you have like some time off, we'll bring it upstairs, set it up, and then you can just play NES all day. And I was like, that sounds like just lovely. So I was like thinking of all the games that we have that I was like, oh, I'm going to bring this up. It's going to be so much fun. And then out of nowhere, I went, you know what? I'm going to put in Paperboy 2, specifically the second one, because in the second one, you can choose to be Paperboy or Papergirl.
Of course.
Which I always appreciated. And because the girl has like orangish hair, so I always liked that as a child. And it turns out it was probably my favorite game as a kid, because I've been playing it nonstop for the last like week. Anytime I'm like, oh, I think I have 5 minutes, I will play it. First time I played it, I died pretty quick. Sorry, you don't die in the game, you get fired.
Of course.
And so you have to try and make it from Monday to Sunday on like 5 lives. You have to deliver papers to like 10 houses. You have to avoid obstacles, all of these things. And so once you do that, you go from easy street to middle way, and then, to middle road, and then to hard way or something like that. But I was like, I want to get to that middle one. You can find codes online to get you to the middle one, but I'm like, I want to earn it. I got to get there on my own.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been playing this off and on to the point where the kids will come in the room and they see me playing, and they see like, oh, Paper Girl got fired. And I'm like, oh yeah. And my 6-year-old leaves the room, and I hear him talking to my older child, and he just goes, did you see Mom got fired? I was like, that's going to be the conversation at school.
Yep.
It's going to be like, hey, what did you do yesterday? Well, my mom got fired. To which I thought it was helpful to go, I didn't get fired. I died. Different, because I'm more insulted by being fired than I am by dying. So,
which is also going to make those conversations at school so much easier for them. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think about that. But I it's been a struggle. I haven't been able to do it every single day because obviously work. But we were supposed to record last night, and things came up and we couldn't. So I ended up having an extra day. I polished off my notes, did an extra thing. And so I had like a chunk of time. I had 25 minutes before we were going to start. And I was like, well, I mean, it doesn't make sense to start anything. And what am I going to do? Just sit here for 20 minutes? I'm a little too ADHD to just sit here doing nothing for like 20 minutes. So I'm like, well, I should do something. And as I'm like thinking about it out loud, my husband is slowly unraveling the cord of the controller and is slowly setting it up in like a, just sit, just play. And I was like, okay. And so I get there. I went days. I kept dying on the Wednesday, and I was like, I just got to do it. Then I got to a Saturday and I died. And I was like, I just needed one more day. So I'm in this. I'm going for it. I'm playing.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, I finished a day and I was like, okay, I think that was I think that was Friday. I've got 2 more days. And suddenly it came up, congratulations, you've been promoted to the middle road. And I was like, I was so in it that I didn't look at what day of the week it was. And I just focused on my job and I got it done. So I was so excited. And I say my job because, as my husband lovingly pointed out, he's like, so wait, let me get this straight. This is probably your favorite game of all time. I'm like, I love like classic Mario's, of course, but this one is so much fun for me and so much nostalgia. I just love it so much. And he's like, but of all the games in the world, your favorite is one where you have a job. And he's like, you picked a work game. I'm like, yeah, but like, you can throw a paper at a guy and he'll fall in a pool. Like,
Don't try and make it sound whimsical. We both know it's not.
I know. And the thing is, there have been times where he's like, hey, you could hit that thing. And I was like, and risk losing a subscriber? No, it is all about work for me in that game. But it's the job well done at the end that I'm like, yeah, I'm living for it. So now that I've gotten there, now I'm like, oh, well, now I need to try the middle one to see if I can get to the hard one and then do the hard one to the end. That's my goal. I'm not even saying I have to do it all in one. I have a code now. I can use it. I earned that code.
You did.
So I feel like I can use the code and it still counts if I get to the next level. So that is my goal. And then one day when I have a full day off, I want to be in a room with a Wii U and Yoshi's Woolly World. And I want to print out the charts that I made for myself that I can fill out as I go.
Yep.
Because it's part game and part lists, and I like it.
Yep. Lists and work. These are the themes that Christy really likes when she's doing her gaming.
Yeah, I really respond to it for whatever reason. Well, I mean,
it doesn't. If you ask me, just top of head, what's my favorite game to play? The game that I've gotten the most into recently that I love the most is Dr. Mario. So what does it say about me that my favorite game just involves pills?
You're in LA.
You're right. You're right.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I love this for you. I think this is great. And if there was a game called Podcast Hosts, I know that you would say, no, I don't want to play it. And you'd play it and you'd be like, damn it.
I know.
For some reason, the fake podcast is not hitting in Scandinavia.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that would burn me.
Yeah.
The thing is, I love that I feel I have to justify my charts. It's been so long since I played the game. But one of the things you do in Yoshi's Woolly World, he's like a little, the whole world is made out of like yarn, and it's very cute and whimsical.
Cute.
And one of the things you collect yarn, and there's so many yarn you can get in like a level or whatever. And so I created a document that has something for each level that I can cross off and highlight so I can keep track of what I'm doing. Because if you're going to do a game, you do it complete from start to finish, even all the bonus things.
Of course.
That's how you have fun.
Well, no, that's how you have fun.
Yeah,
I'm kidding. But what I'm also hearing is that there's a collectible element, and that also speaks to your interests.
Oh, I literally said to my husband just the other day, I said, look, I understand that I have an addictive personality when it comes to collecting, and this is why I can't do hard drugs. Because I know that's it for me. That's it for me. Like, I know my personality, and I know the way I am with collecting. And you're right. You're right. It's Yoshi's Woolly World is about collecting for me. Paperboy 2 is about the childhood praise I always wanted.
The childhood praise. Oh my God.
For a pat on the back for a job well done. Yeah.
Pops.
Favorite part of that movie.
Wedding Singer has come up, I think, in the last 3 episodes in a row.
Has it?
We're gonna need to do a
Specifically,
viewing.
Steve Buscemi. That
Yeah.
bit?
Yeah.
Oh, so funny.
Now I have to ask very quickly because I'm not as up to date on the wonderful world of Mario. But didn't they also have a paper version of something? Wasn't there like paper Mario?
There
so
was.
they've got paper and they've got wool. What's next?
Well, the thing is, and I may get a lot of hate for this, never cared for the paper.
Okay.
Look,
okay.
I am a original Mario, Mario 3, or I love like a Mario Party or the Wii and Wii U ones. I've never played a Switch. So people may gasp if they'd like to. Someday I'll look into one, but not today. Yeah. But the first game for Yoshi's Woolly World, it's him in this wool. They've made a game for the Switch, which is why I've considered looking into a Switch. It's called Yoshi's Crafted World or something along those lines. And it's all like little like craft items that everything's made out of. I can't express enough how cute this whole thing is. And then if he gets a certain kind of wool, it changes his coloring. So you can make it so he's a little cow, or you can make it so he's like a chicken. It's adorable. So I like it for the whimsy and the collecting.
I love all of this. There was a game, I think it was called Rainbow Island. I can't remember, but I played it as a child, and in the pandemic, I got really into like I got like an old Sega Genesis,
right?
And I got all of them, like Super Nintendo, like all of them. And I ordered a copy of, was it called Rainbow Island? I'll figure it out. I'll look it up later. But anyway, I ordered a copy of it. And it was like, because this updated Sega Genesis thing I bought had a bunch of games inside, but then you could also play the old cartridges.
Oh,
if you happened to have them. So I was like, okay, great. It took 8 months for that cartridge to arrive, and it was a dud. It was a fake. It was a fake. There was nothing on it. And to that I say, scammers, that's mean. That was a mean one.
Yeah. Oh, it was a mean nothing one. Burns me like a scammer.
Well, listen, there's a whole genre of true crime about scammers that's really coming up now. Scamming is like the new murder. Well, because it's the true crime without the murder. So exactly. I mean, in terms of the documentaries, that's all I meant. But anyway, listen, scammers, not nice. Listen, before we go any further, what you drinking over there? Are you dipping in? What's going on?
I'm doing a water and a Coke. The Coke just to keep me alive. The water for the hydration. Because I don't need alcohol, because I'm high on being promoted.
I'm really proud of you. I'm really proud of you.
Thank you. I did hit my husband. He was headphones doing something else. And I did like oh my God, like look at the screen. It got embarrassing for a bit. Wouldn't have been embarrassing had I not just told so many dear listeners. But the point is, what a joy. What a joy. The problem is it kind of kept going. And then that's when I looked at a clock and went, I'm late for work.
The good news is, though, dear listeners, what she hasn't said, because she defends me, that protects me to the end, is that I was equally as late. So I was scrambling. It was perfect timing is the point. At the end of the day, it was perfectly timed.
It was meant to be.
It was meant to be. So it all worked. And I'm glad that was how it worked out. Kismet.
Oh, yeah.
Now, in terms of what I'm drinking, I think you're all really going to enjoy this. I have the dredges of a Starbucks iced coffee. Just a kiss of it, and some water. I've been off booze because I was at a joint birthday party a couple weeks ago, a weekend long shindig at a ranch, and I went into that weekend saying, "Don't drink this weekend." You know what I mean? Like, it's a big thing. A lot of people don't drink. You don't do something that's opening you up to doing something foolish. And it was like I set foot in there and I was like, where's the margs? You know what I mean? And so we just went for it. And I've been like, it's time for a break. It's time for a break.
You thought you were going to go to a joint weekend long birthday and not have any drinks?
It's silly. It's silly. It's cute. It's cute and sweet that I thought that was possible.
The naivety is beautiful.
Right?
Yeah. That is cute.
It's cute. But again, but we went for it and we went for it to the point that the second night I actually couldn't drink. I was just like, oh, I really went for it last night. I think I'm going to bow out.
I respect it.
But then I was like, I did dry January. Then I went for it for 2 months. Now I'm like, do I take another, few weeks? Like, do I do a 1 month off, 2 months on kind of pattern? Like, is that the way to live life? The answer is no. Moderation every week. That's the answer. But that's just not how I live,
And I'm over here being like, ooh, I'm getting a little warm thinking about a pattern. What's wrong with me?
Everything is right with you. That's what it is.
Broken.
Now, very quickly, I do have to say before we get into it, this week's episode is, of course, we're talking about Jill Dando.
Yes.
And Jill Dando was, of course, a BBC anchor, reporter. I don't know what journalist.
They specifically call it newsreader.
Thank you very much, newsreader. And so we were texting earlier because we often like to talk off the top of the show about something that maybe connects in some way to the episode. Not always, but sometimes we do. And Christy was like, I don't know, do you have anything? And I was like, well, there is one thing that is specifically about the news and us. And one of those things that we share in common is that people know this, but there's a goal to which I'm going. So go with me on this journey for a sec.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that we share, because if you're an OG listener or even a newish listener of the show, you'll probably know that, Christy is really the Blanche of this operation, but I've been known to blanch lately. But the one thing that we've both blanch about is CNN news anchors. And specifically the gay men.
Yes.
Now, for some reason, this is, of course, I'm talking for myself about none other than that beautiful specimen, Don Lemon. And for Christy, obviously, we're talking Anderson Cooper.
Yeah.
Now, there is others on there as well that also do tickle fancies. But I feel like if we both had to choose a favorite, you correct me if I'm wrong, I'd say those are our favorites.
Oh, 100%.
And it's interesting to me, not that their gender and their sexuality is truly meaningless in terms of what they do. I am not suggesting that it means anything. It's just only delightful to me that it happens to be that we both have this synchronicity, that it's like, that's my guy, and that they happen to have that in common. And
we couldn't choose the same CNN boyfriend.
We never could. And we also couldn't choose a straight one for some reason. It doesn't matter. The point is that it doesn't matter what he really wants. In my mind, he wants what I want. And I don't need to expand on that further because it's going to get kind of gross. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. My fantasies are very vanilla. But anyway, so why did I go there? Anyway, I'm derailing. But all of this to say, this actually came up recently, and this is what this made me think of. And I have not told her this, so this is a surprise to her too. But along these lines, I was talking about how growing up, I would have a very specific. Do you remember? I would get very specific crushes when I was a wee Blanche, and one of mine for years was somebody that we referred to only by the name of Trident Guy. Do you remember Trident Guy? It was the young gentleman, and he was in a Trident commercial, the gum. And he also then, I discovered, was on Are You Afraid of the Dark?
Hey!
A kids show that aired on YTV in Canada. Shout out. If you haven't seen it, that's a romp of a show. But anyway, so I was talking about this, and I was talking about how you and I, for whatever reason, I don't know why this came up. We both love, these specific CNNers. And I was like, and there was this guy, I knew him from a Trident commercial. Then I knew him from Are You Afraid of the Dark? Turns out then later, and when he became an adult, he worked for the Weather Network in Canada, which I think counts kind of like a news anchor.
Yeah,
right?
I know his name now. Okay.
Ross Hull.
Ross Hull is
the name. And as I'm telling this story, and this was literally at the weekend, 2 weekends ago when we were at the ranch, as I'm telling this story, I'm looking him up to say like, well, this is this guy, whatever. And I start to laugh because I'm like, and spoiler alert, of course he's gay. There was a beautiful family photo of him and his partner, but I was just like, what are the chances? And then I started thinking about it and I was like, I think part of it is that I just trust the news more from a gay man or a woman than I do from a straight man. And that I think at the end of the day, yeah, that's what it is that I'm like, at the end of the day, if you're going to give me bad news, you know, what you got over there, psychologist hat?
I mean, what I heard is I trust a gay man or a woman over a straight man.
I should also include non-binary people in that mix. I trust them too.
Of course. Again.
Yeah.
It screams volumes.
Well, yeah, I guess it does. But it was just so funny that in the moment, I think I had even said, I was like, oh yeah, and he works on the Weather Network, which is basically like the news. I was like, chances are he's gay then if I love him. And then he was like, it was just like, I knew. So shout out Ross Hall. Big fan. You know, big fan.
Love and kudos. Look at that career.
I mean, I was impacted. Yes, exactly.
Children's show. Fucking real live TV.
Beloved weatherman. Yeah. I don't know. Is weatherman the term that we use? I think it is, isn't it? Meteorologist? I don't know.
Oh, meteorologist sounds like a superhero or something. So it sounds like it like hits better, you know? What does that mean?
I know what it means. I know what it means. Anyway, listen, I couldn't love it more. So anyway, synchronicity again, because now we're talking about the news. It fits seamlessly.
Yes. Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
And also, look, they're not always gay.
No, but I'm not interested if they aren't.
Look, I'll say this, and it may surprise some.
Okay.
MSNBC.
Oh,
Chris Hayes.
Huh.
I would trust him to the ends of the earth, and I have nothing to base this on. If he showed up at my house and was like, could I babysit your kids? I'd be like, I have some errands to run. That's not a good thing. Like, that's not healthy, but there's something about his face. I trust him with my life. It also could be that he seems super close with Seth Meyers.
Oh, sure.
That could be a thing.
Yeah.
But
no, I get that. I get that.
I'm a nut job, I think, when it comes to news readers of any kind.
Listen, the answer is same. But also, speaking of synchronicities, today, literally today, my pink T-Rex shirt that says "Prove Me Wrong," my sample came in the mail. Today is actually the day that last episode was released, where we talked about dinosaurs, and that my whole point is, as a child, I was like, why do they have to be green and brown? Couldn't they have been bright colors? And now everyone today is sending me links that I'm right, that there's like science behind it. I haven't had a chance to read them yet, but all I want to say is vindication. Also, shirts available on truecrewmerch.com.
I like, what a roller coaster journey we are, because they think they're coming for true crime, and in the end they're getting science.
Yep.
But like dinosaur science, paleontology, if you will. Look out, Ross.
Yeah.
Ross always comes back to Friends for me.
I know. Well, listen, on that note, let's get into it. Yeah. We are talking, of course, Jill Dando. Now, this was our March patrons poll winner. We're over on Patreon, patreon.com/truecrimeandcocktails. And every month there is a poll where you can vote if you are one of our patrons for one of the episodes that we will cover each month on this stream of the podcast. So if you're interested, you can go over there, check that out for more info on that. But this was the March winner. And so we're going to get into it. If you're not familiar, never fear. I'm going to give you a synopsis now. In April 1999, Jill Dando, one of the BBC's biggest stars, was shot in front of her own home in Fulham, London. Nearly 23 years later, Jill's case remains unsolved. So what happened to Jill Dando? How was the suspect able to shoot someone in broad daylight and escape without anyone seeing them? And why would someone want her dead in the first place? Could it be related to a NATO bombing or to Jill's show Crime Watch? Was a famous warlord involved? Or maybe an ordinary man who flew under the radar? Christy Oxborrow investigates.
I'm going to tell you, there's some synchronicities come up in this to an unsettling level for me.
Really?
There's some things that I'm like, okay.
Okay.
And trust me, you'll know it even if I don't point it out.
I can't wait.
So my disclaimer, as always, this episode will contain mentions of sexual assault and suicide. Trigger warning for those who need it. And my biggest apologies for any and all names that I terribly mispronounce. I'm doing my best.
Of course.
There's a lot in there, and it was suggested to me, maybe read this over a bit, practice some of the words, and I was too busy getting to middle road to do that. So my job came before my job. So
yeah, listen,
she is who she is.
It's healthy.
I'd like to think so.
Yeah.
So Jill Wendy Dando was born November 9th, 1961 in Weston-super-Mare, Somerset, England. Before Jill was born, her parents, Jack Dando and Winifred Mary Jean Hockey, had a son named Nigel in 1952. On January 12th, 1965, Jill had surgery to repair a hole in her heart and a blocked pulmonary artery. She was just 3 years old at the time.
Goodness.
Jill attended multiple schools throughout her youth, including Broad Oak Sixth Form Center, where she was head girl, which, for those who aren't familiar with the term or are not a Potterhead, means essentially she was a leader who represented the entire student body. Head boy and head girl, which are now referred to as head pupil, were role models for their fellow students and would represent the school at events. Jill attended South Glamorgan Institute of Higher Education in Cardiff, where she studied journalism. She was also a member of the Exeter Little Theatre Company, appearing in plays at the Barnfield Theatre. In 1979, Jill volunteered at Sunshine Hospital Radio, and in 1980, Jill started her first job as a trainee reporter for the Weston Mercury, the local weekly newspaper. In 1985, Jill went to work for BBC Radio Devon as a newsreader. That same year, she transferred to Southwest, where she presented Spotlight Southwest, a regional news magazine program. I need to say it that way so you know that I spelt it with the extra M and E.
Thank you.
Because that's where I'm at. Sadly, around this time, Jill's mother, Winifred, passed away from leukemia at the age of 57.
Oh, God.
I know. And this was 1986. So Jill was still quite young, which, I mean, at any age, really, it's sad, but it's just, we're only going to get sadder, folks.
Yeah.
Jill returned to the BBC in a show called Spotlight in Plymouth in 1987 before making the big leap to national television in 1988 as the host of the On the Hour news bulletins that aired on BBC One and BBC Two. Jill then presented Breakfast Time, another BBC show from 1988 to 1989, before moving to the 6 o'clock news, where she remained for the rest of her career. She became a main co-presenter in 1994. Jill also presented the BBC 1 o'clock news from 1993 to 1995, as well as the travel program Holiday. Starting in 1995, Jill co-presented the show Crime Watch alongside Nick Ross. The show focused on unsolved UK crimes, where they would invite the public to contact the police through a special number. Nick Ross remained with the show until 2007, and the show was officially canceled in October 2017. In 1997, Jill won BBC Personality of the Year. At the time of her death, she was the biggest star that the BBC had.
Oh, wow.
Jill presented the first episode of The Antiques Inspectors on April 25th, 1999. Jill had finished recording the final episode the day before. After her death, the show was canceled, but from September 5th to October 24th, BBC One aired the remainder of the episodes as a tribute to Jill. At the time of her death, Jill was featured on the cover of the April 24th to 30th issue of Radio Times magazine and was set to co-host the BAFTA Awards on May 9th, 1999, alongside Michael Parkinson. After her death, Parkinson hosted the event alone. Which brings me to an award show side note. BAFTA is the British Academy of Film and Television Arts, and because I couldn't help myself, I started looking into BAFTA history and I learned some fun facts. Are they relevant? No. Is this how my brain works? Yeah. So that's just where we go. For actresses, Dame Judi Dench and Meryl Streep are tied with 15 nominations each.
Wow.
The top winners are Dame Judi Dench and Maggie Smith with seven wins each, both 5 acting wins and 2 special awards. For actors, Laurence Olivier, Michael Caine, and Dustin Hoffman are tied for the most nominations at 8 each, where Peter Finch is the top winner with 5 wins. And just some other random fun facts, because I know we all love them, we being me. The youngest person to win a BAFTA was Jodie Foster, who was 13 when she won Best Actress in a Supporting Role for Taxi Driver and Bugsy Malone in 1977. The oldest person to win an award was 84-year-old Emmanuelle Riva, who won Best Actress in a Leading Role for Amour in 2013. The most nominations received by a single film was Gandhi in 1983 with 16 nominations. And finally, the most awards won by a single film was Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid with 9 wins in 1971.
Huh.
I know, right? Which is weird because I mentioned Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. I think it was maybe in the Patreon episode for the last episode, but
yeah,
because there was something on that Unsolved Mysteries episode about Butch Cassidy. So I just was like, oh, that's coming up again. That's interesting. So before we get into details of the crime, I know we're all gathered here to discuss it and we're ready for it, but I want to briefly touch on Jill's personal life. Some of it will be relevant to later on.
Okay.
Jill dated BBC executive Bob Wheaton from 1989 to 1996 before having a brief relationship with Simon Basil, a national park warden. In December 1997, Jill was set up on a blind date with gynecologist Alan Farthing by a mutual friend. Alan was separated from his wife at the time, and their divorce was finalized in late 1998. On January 31st, 1999, Jill and Alan announced their engagement. They planned to marry in a church in Putney on September 25th, 1999, but sadly their wedding would not take place, which brings us to the events of April 26th, 1999. Around 11:32 a.m., Jill arrived at 29 Gowan Avenue, her home in Fulham, West London. One of Jill's neighbors, Richard Hughes, later told police he heard Jill arming her car alarm, and seconds later, he heard a, quote, very distinctive scream, adding that she sounded, quote, quite surprised. Richard admitted he thought nothing of the scream and didn't bother to go investigate in any way.
What?
Yep. About 14 minutes later, Jill's neighbor, Helen Doble, walked past Jill's house at 11:46 a.m. and spotted Jill lying in a pool of blood with her head resting against her front door. Helen called 999, the British 911, at 11:47 a.m. and said, quote, looks like somebody is cut up. There's a lot of blood. The injuries were so bad that police couldn't tell immediately if Jill had been shot or stabbed.
Oh my God.
The ambulance arrived at the hospital at 12:30 p.m. and despite a number of resuscitation attempts, Jill was officially declared dead at 1:03 p.m. at Charing Cross Hospital. A police officer at the hospital who had worked with Jill on Crime Watch identified her body. She was just 37 years old. So Jill Dando was described as kind, charming, a loving sister, and a devoted daughter. She had a natural talent, a joie de vivre, and always had a kind word for everybody. Jill's Crime Watch co-host described Jill as, quote, everything anyone could want in a colleague and a friend. And for me, I did not know much of Jill Dando before researching, but while watching footage of her, she reminded me so much of Princess Diana because they both have this graceful, kind of lovely way about them. The website for Jill's hometown of Weston-super-Mare described Jill as, quote, not since Diana, Princess of Wales, has the nation been so affected by such a tragic and wasteful loss of life.
Oh, wow.
On the day of her murder, Jill was meant to present the 6 o'clock news. And sadly, her death would end up being the lead story. Jill's last episode of Crime Watch aired just 6 days before her murder, and the next episode to air featured a reconstruction of her murder, appealing to the public for information on the case. So we're going to take a step back and look at everything we know about April 26th. According to Jill's fiancé, Alan, Jill had spent the previous night at his place in Chiswick, West London. She made him breakfast before he headed to work for the day. Alan said that Jill had plans to attend a charity lunch at a hotel in Mayfair. From what investigators can tell, Jill left the house around 10 a.m., drove to a garage on the A4 where she bought milk and gas, or should I say petrol.
Thank you.
Jill then drove to Hammersmith in West London to visit the King's Mall shopping center. While there, Jill visited 3 shops, Dixon's, Ryman's, and The Link, to pick up a cartridge for her fax machine. She left the mall at 11:01 a.m. Jill stopped at Cope's Fishmongers on Fulham Road, where she purchased 2 fillets of Dover sole. According to phone records, Jill made 4 phone calls while she was out, which included calling a friend, calling her agent's assistant, and making a 192 directory inquiry, which is like a Canada 411, or I guess almost like an operator situation. Jill also called a West End theater company to confirm her booking for the musical Mamma Mia, which she had purchased for Alan's upcoming birthday. The last call was placed at 11:23 a.m., when it is believed that Jill was still at the Fishmongers. Again, I just recently commented to my husband that in my lifetime, I need to see Mamma Mia because it's one of my favorite things in the world.
It's come up on the show a few times.
So the idea that she was going to see Mamma Mia, I was like, okay. And again, the synchronicities are random and wild.
Yeah.
After purchasing the fish, Jill drove to her home on Gowan Avenue. She arrived around 11:32 a.m., armed her car alarm, and headed to her front door with a shopping bag in one hand and her keys in the other. Neighbor Richard claimed he heard Jill's car arrive, and he heard Jill arm the car, and about 30 seconds later, he heard her scream. Richard later told police he, quote, thought it was someone surprising somebody. So he just didn't bother looking into it. Helen Noble was on the way to a friend's house when she found Jill's body. She immediately ran to the home of her friend Vida Saunders and asked Vida to accompany her to Jill's house. Vida said, quote, she was still clutching a set of keys in one hand, probably her door keys or possibly her car keys. The handles of her handbag were over the other arm, and her mobile phone was inside, ringing constantly. The women called 999 and then ran to a nearby doctor's office or GP's surgery to get help. Vida said that the receptionist said that it was most likely the victim was dead and that they shouldn't touch anything. The ambulance soon arrived and emergency crews began to feverishly revive Jill. She was taken to the hospital at 12:30, where doctors continued working on resuscitating her until 1:03 p.m. There were no defensive wounds or signs of a struggle, so police believe the suspect grabbed Jill from behind and pushed her to the ground before quickly shooting her once in the head. According to the autopsy, the bullet entered behind her left ear and exited above her right before embedding in the front door. The bullet had been fired from a 9mm short caliber semi-automatic pistol with no silencer. Police were able to determine this due to the fact that there was an impression of the weapon's barrel and sight clearly visible in the victim's head. Since the gun was held tightly to the victim's head, it would reduce any noise as well as reduce any blood spatter, which could explain why a man was allegedly seen leaving the scene, but there was no mention of him being covered in blood. There was also a bruise on Jill's forearm, which police believe occurred when the suspect forced her to the ground. Police immediately started a massive investigation with a task force that they called, and are you ready for it? Operation Oxborrow.
Are you kidding?
I am not. It's not spelled the same. It is spelled the very British way. But it's close enough that I was instantly unsettled by that detail. I also couldn't find why they chose that particular name. But it's still off-putting at best to hear your last name said throughout an entire documentary. It's weird. But
Yeah.
Operation Oxborrow does sound like what I should have called my wedding planning. So I feel like I missed an opportunity there. But yeah, it's a rare name, and so it's just weird. I know there is a town called Oxborrow in England, spelt this same way, but again, that has nothing to do with it. So I still don't know why
That's really
they chose it. But coming across that was a real surprise.
Yeah.
Real surprise.
Yeah.
With such a high profile case, investigators struggled with the fact that Jill was in constant contact with thousands of people and was known to millions. In the first 6 months, it is said that Operation Oxborrow had taken more than 1,000 statements and spoken to more than 2,500 people. But when they were left with very few clues, police had to look at numerous theories. They suggested that perhaps Jill had been murdered by a jealous ex-boyfriend, or possibly a man she was having an affair with. But after checking Jill's phone records and speaking with her friends and colleagues, police ruled out the theory as they could find no evidence of an affair or any sort of angry ex. Police briefly considered if it was a case of mistaken identity, but since Jill was murdered at her own front door, that theory seemed unlikely. The theory that it was a robbery was ruled out, as Jill's jewelry, purse, wallet, as well as all of her new purchases were still found at the scene. Operation Oxborrow also investigated the theory that Jill was allegedly investigating a pedophile ring at the BBC and that management had tried to silence her. However, investigators found no proof of the alleged ring or that Jill was looking into anything of that nature, so the theory was let go. Investigators also looked into the idea that Jill was murdered by a business partner or professional rival. Her agent was even briefly interviewed as a suspect, but again, no evidence could be found to support that theory. So then what theories did the police find credible? Well, I'm going to focus specifically on 5, starting with Barry George. About a year after Jill's murder, police were under an immense amount of pressure to get the case solved. So they turned their attention to the theory that Jill was murdered by a stalker or an obsessed fan.
Mm-hmm.
Even Jill's brother Nigel claimed that Jill was concerned by, quote, some guy pestering her. However, according to detectives, that particular guy, who was never named publicly, was ruled out as a suspect. At first, police thought that someone had been waiting outside of Jill's flat for her to arrive home. However, at the time, Jill was spending most of her time living at her fiance's house in Chiswick. And at the time of her death, Jill's house on Gowan was actually up for sale. She had moved to the Fulham house in 1994. So for someone to try and attack Jill, wouldn't have known when she would be at the Gowan house. So would they just sit there and wait for days? Probably not. But what if they were following her? Well, police checked through 191 CCTV cameras that captured Jill on the morning running her errands, but they couldn't find any evidence that anyone had been following her. Then police were pointed towards 39-year-old Barry George, who lived about half a mile or 0.8 kilometers away from Jill's flat. Around the time of Jill's murder, George had allegedly tried to get a taxi out of the area, but had no money. George was arrested for posing as a police officer, as he had allegedly applied to be a cop, but was rejected, so he cut up the rejection letter and used it to make a warrant card. A warrant card is the ID that police carry around with them. George also tried to join Kensington and Chelsea Gun Club and the Territorial Army, but was rejected.
Oh,
George
boy.
George also was known for going under false names. He changed his name to Steve Majors after the $6 Million Man character Steve Austin, who was played by Lee Majors. And in his youth, he changed his name to Paul Gadd, which is the real name of singer Gary Glitter, which leads me to oh, come on, man. Side note.
Yeah.
Yeah, we all know it's coming. I can't say Gary Glitter and not get into it.
Mm-mm.
He's worse than I thought. That's something.
Oh, yeah.
I knew it was bad. I didn't know it was this bad.
Oh, no.
Gary Glitter was a British glam rock singer, popular in the 70s and 80s, known for I'm the Leader of the Gang and Rock and Roll Part 2, aka the main song you hear at literally every hockey game. As many of you know, Gary was arrested in November 1997 after he took his laptop to a computer store in Bristol, and a technician discovered child pornography on the laptop's hard drive. Police then found more images when they searched Gary's home in Somerset and in London. In November 1999, Gary admitted to downloading more than 4,000 photos and videos and was sentenced to 4 months in prison.
Oh, my God.
He tried to flee the country and live on his yacht, traveling to Spain, Andalusia, Cuba, then Cambodia. In March 2005, Gary was banned from a nightclub after allegedly groping a teenage waitress. And in November of that same year, it was found that Gary had a 15-year-old girl living in his flat. He was arrested while trying to board a flight to Bangkok. Then six Vietnamese women and children between the ages of 11 and 23 claimed that Gary had sexually assaulted them. Unfortunately, the charges were dropped due to a lack of evidence, and after Gary paid off the families of the victims, the girls tried to plea to the courts on Gary's behalf.
Oh, dear.
Then in March 2006, because this dude is the worst, Gary was tried on charges of committing obscene acts in Vietnam with 2 girls aged 10 and 11.
Oh, God.
He faced up to 14 years if convicted. He was found guilty and somehow sentenced to just 4 years. Gary claims he was simply being framed by British tabloid newspapers. He was released in August 2008 and refused to board a flight to London, knowing that police were waiting for him. He claimed he had a heart condition, so wouldn't be able to fly, but a doctor declared Gary fit to travel. Gary again refused to leave before he was literally kicked out of the country. Finally, after 3 days, he arrived in London, where he was added to the sex offenders registry. But because life often catches up with a true scumbag, in June 2014, Gary was charged with 8 counts of sexual offenses committed against 2 girls aged 12 to 14 between 1977 and 1980. 6 months later, in January 2015, Gary was accused of 7 counts of indecent assault, 1 count of attempted rape, and 2 other sexual offenses against 3 girls between 1975 and 1980. Gary allegedly invited 2 girls, aged 12 and 13, backstage after one of his shows. He was convicted on 4 counts and sentenced to 16 years in prison. As of April 2022, the 77-year-old piece of absolute trash is still incarcerated. And if that wasn't all gross enough, Gary makes approximately 250,000 British pounds or 328,000 US dollars a year from American radio stations playing his songs. And it was reported that in 2013, he made almost $1 million from Oasis sampling his lyrics in the song Hello. Gary also made about 300,000 British pounds or 393,000 US dollars after his music was featured in the movie Silver Linings Playbook, and hundreds of thousands more after one of his songs was in the 2019 Joker film.
Oh my God.
And I know I may just be naive, but I figure let's maybe stop putting the music of convicted pedophiles in movies so that they profit. Maybe let's not. Let's stop.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. But, back to Barry George. After the death of Freddie Mercury in November 1991, George, who was a massive fan, changed his name to Barry Balsara after Mercury's real surname. A witness identified George as being on Gowan Avenue 4.5 hours before Jill's murder, and multiple other witnesses claimed to have seen a man near Jill's house about 2 hours before the murder. Police believed that man could have been George. However, none of those witnesses picked George out of a police lineup or identity parade. And it should be noted that most of the witnesses described the man fleeing the scene as well-dressed and clean-shaven, which did not fit George's regular appearance.
Okay.
Then police learned that George also had a history of sexual offenses and stalking women, including harassing the women who worked for Queen's fan club. When George was arrested for Jill's murder, his mother said, quote, "Our gentle boy couldn't have done this." And gentle feels like an interesting way to describe a man who has several convictions for sexual assaults, such as the 33-month sentence George was handed in 1983 for the attempted rape of a student who he followed from the tube station to a block of apartments. He only served 18 months of that sentence. Or then there's the charges of 2 accounts of indecent assault in 1981. George was acquitted of one assault, but was convicted of the other and was given a 3-month sentence. When asked about his previous attacks on women, George's sister said, quote, "We told him it wasn't acceptable, and he did apologize."
Oh, come on.
Although it should be noted, he apologized to his family and not to the victims in any way. George also allegedly assaulted his wife. In 1989, George married a 35-year-old woman named Itsuko Toyd, who admitted that it was a marriage of convenience. However, it was, quote, "nonetheless violent and terrifying." 4 months after the wedding, Itsuko went to the police and said that George had assaulted her. He was arrested in October 1989, but the case was eventually dropped. And a month later, Itsuko went home to Japan. At their wedding, George stated his occupation was stuntman. It was not. It was also found that George laid flowers at Jill Dando's Gowan home the day after she was murdered. He wasn't the only one, as hundreds of people had, but the fact that George had really worked with the police's theory that George was an obsessed fan. George, of course, claimed he was delivering the flowers on behalf of his church. George was put under surveillance, where they witnessed him constantly approaching random women and saying, quote, "I know where you live."
Oh, Jesus. Oh, my God.
Mm-hmm. George was also caught in numerous lies during various interviews, such as when he claimed to be Freddie Mercury's cousin, which he claimed that one a lot, claimed he was a roadie for Michael Jackson, and that he served in the British Army's elite SAS Corps. On the day of Jill's funeral, George was seen on a bus where he told a fellow passenger he was headed to Jill's memorial and he was going to do a reading there. He then doubled down with more lies, saying he didn't know Jill well, but she had interviewed his cousin, Freddie Mercury.
Oh, boy.
So then police get a search warrant to look at George's Crookham Road apartment, where it was discovered that George was a compulsive hoarder. Inside his apartment, investigators found hundreds of undeveloped rolls of film with more than 4,000 photos on them. The photos turned out to be mostly pictures that George had taken of 419 random women on the street. George was obsessed with celebrities, keeping photos and clippings of people such as Karen Keating, Fiona Foster, Emma Freud, and of course, Jill Dando. During a police interview, George denied having any interest in Jill, but then at George's house, 54 newspaper clippings about Jill were found. But that only accounted for about 8% of the clippings found, as there were over 670. The defense argued that there were no personal photos, videos, or autographs of Jill found in George's apartment. So, of course, they were like, well, if there's nothing like that, he couldn't have been obsessed.
What?
But included in the photos was a picture of George holding a pistol, although the weapon was never found, which is interesting since in a police interview, George claimed that he never fired a gun or even handled one. The photo is proof that he has handled one. And in 1986, he pretended to raid the home of a family friend by ringing their doorbell and charging in when they opened the door and firing a blank shot with a pistol, which feels like proof that he's fired a pistol, which is another lie that he has told.
Yeah.
I guess one could look at it from the angle that he might have been nervous and just thought he had to say no to every question so he wouldn't get in trouble in the police interview. I don't know. Also found at George's home during the police search, a gun holster, business cards from arms dealers, and notes about the names and addresses of women in the area, as well as some of their vehicle license plates.
What?
I could not find if Jill's information was on that list or not. It is a question I immediately had, but of course they've never released the list.
Right.
George also allegedly went to the local housing department just days after Jill's murder and asked if they were considering some sort of memorial to Jill, which feels like something you do if you had an interest in someone. But overall, the only link to Jill Dando were the newspaper clippings and the fact that George had 4 copies of Ariel magazine's memorial issue of Jill's murder. George also allegedly had an obsession with the BBC, which started in 1976 when he worked as a messenger there for about 5 months. George was arrested May 25th, 2000, and officially charged with the murder of Jill Dando on May 28th. The trial started February 26th, 2001. Investigators found a polyester fiber on Jill's coat that they believed may have come from the suspect's pants. However, the fiber was too small and too common for experts to be sure. Then the police felt they hit the jackpot. Numerous witnesses reported seeing a well-dressed man in a long, dark coat fleeing the scene around the time of Jill's murder. And when police searched George's home, they found a long, dark coat, which, when closely inspected, was found to have a single microscopic particle of gun residue on the inside of a pocket. The thing about the residue is it was the exact same type of residue that was found on the bullet casing that was at the scene, as well as in Jill's hair, near where the wound was. Experts argued that it was possible for George to pick up the residue from someone else, for example, coming into contact with a police officer or a hobby shooter on public transit. Apparently, this happens to 1 in 100 people, which is horrifying to think about. But the particle was tiny and it was found a year after the crime, which could mean it was more likely to be not relevant. To me, I find it wild that it wasn't just any gun residue, but the exact same type. But again, I'm not a police officer. Some believe that George was just a scapegoat being used by the police because they were pressured to find an end to the case. But on July 2nd, 2001, George was convicted by a majority of 10-1 and sentenced to life imprisonment. During the trial, George was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, as well as several personality disorders, including antisocial and narcissistic. It was also found that George had an IQ of 75 and that he was a, quote, lone obsessive Walter Mitty type figure. However, his lawyer chose not to bring this up in court, as it was possible it could have backfired. After the trial, it was revealed that in 1983, George had been found on the grounds of Kensington Palace wearing a balaclava and a gas mask, and carrying 15 feet of rope and 2 knives. Kensington Palace at the time was the home of Prince Charles and Princess Diana. Princess Diana, again, just randomly coming up in this episode. Allegedly, in the 10 months prior to the crime, George was found wandering the Kensington grounds in the middle of the night on 4 separate occasions. He was not charged for the incident, and the files on it were destroyed 6 years after it happened, which is the customary thing to do.
Right.
According to the Telegraph, George was at one point on Scotland Yard's list of potential dangers to royal figures.
Really? Jesus.
George even showed up in the crowd of Princess Diana's funeral, holding a sign that read, quote, Queen of Hearts, signed Barry Balsara, Freddie Mercury's cousin. When George's apartment was searched in 2001, investigators found pictures and articles about Princess Diana, as well as her car registration numbers. Where would you get that, and what would you do with that information when the woman died in a car accident? I'm not linking it. I'm just saying it out loud, speculating.
Yeah.
George tried to appeal the court's decision in 2002 and 2006, but was denied. But when he appealed a third time in November 2007 through the Criminal Cases Review Commission, George was granted a second trial. However, this time it was established that the gun residue particle, the prosecution's main forensic evidence, was inadmissible. This trial lasted 8 weeks and ended on August 1st, 2008, with a unanimous vote that George be acquitted.
Wow.
The Sun and News of the World newspapers published articles that suggested, despite being acquitted, that George was still guilty, which led to a libel suit. In 2009, George accepted an undisclosed amount from the News Group newspapers. In 2010, George settled a libel suit against Mirror Group newspapers for another undisclosed amount. I mean, I don't even know at this point.
I mean, I already have so many thoughts, but of course I'm going to save them till the end, but this is wild.
Yeah.
It feels, I mean, I don't want to tip my own hand, but I just feel like, I mean, this man, he feels very resourceful for someone who's being painted as being maybe not. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I have a lot of questions about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, listen, we're going to ask some of them. We're going to answer some of them. Some of them are just going to go into the ether because they can never be answered later on the show. But for now, we're going to take a quick break, grab another drink, hit the can, and we're going to be right back with more on the Jill Dando episode of this episode of True Crime and Cocktails. All right. Here we go. On 3. 1, 2, 3. Welcome back to this episode of True Crime and Cocktails. We're talking, of course, Jill Dando. This Barry George character before the break is still just, I don't know, troubling me, perplexing me, all of the above. But I know that was only the first of 5 theories. My goodness, what possibly is coming next?
Well, police wondered if Jill's murder could have been a professional hit.
Okay.
After all, it was done quickly and quietly in broad daylight in an area that was tightly packed with houses, and yet nobody saw a thing. Not to mention, the amendment to the Firearms Amendment Act 1997 banned the ownership of semi-automatic and pump-action rifles, weapons that fire explosive ammunitions, short shotguns with magazines, and elevated pump action and self-loading rifles. This amendment was passed after the Dunblane school massacre in 1996, where a 43-year-old man walked into Dunblane Primary School in Stirling, Scotland, and killed 16 students and 1 teacher, and also injured 15 others before taking his own life. The student victims were about 5 and 6 years old, which as a mother, I can't.
No.
There has not been a school shooting in the UK since they banned those weapons. Canada has had 19 school shootings since 1884, the most recent being in La Loche, Saskatchewan in 2016. And just for comparison, from 1970 to 2018, the United States has had 1,378 school shootings.
Wow.
The worst year being 2018, when there were 97 separate shootings that year alone. But now I have sufficiently depressed everyone. My whole point here was the weapon used to kill Jill Dando was banned in the country, which makes me feel like maybe it was a professional hit. But who would have ordered such a hit? Well, that brings us to theory number 2, British gangster and drug dealer John Hayes. In the early 80s, Hayes was sentenced to 14 years for robbery. Hayes and his nephew Paul Bennett were arrested in 1993 after a British customs investigation into a Turkish heroin smuggler named Volkan. Officers found a shipment of heroin that was worth approximately 18 million British pounds, or 23.6 million US dollars, and that was in 1993. So,
Wow.
both Hayes and Bennett were sentenced to 18 years in prison. Their lawyer or solicitor offered a deal to the customs officer in charge, saying they will give information about illegal firearms in London in exchange for a reduced sentence. A judge agreed to it, and thanks to their intel, officers were able to seize numerous firearms, including AK-47 assault rifles, submachine guns, shotguns, Uzis, ammunition, and explosives. In exchange for that, in 1996, both Hayes and Bennett were given royal pardons just 11 months into their sentence. And then they were released.
Wow.
Yeah. Police also suspected Hayes of using his security company called Big Brother as a front for money laundering, but they never found official proof of that. In 2001, Hayes was sentenced to 13 years for selling automatic firearms and for drug trafficking. Also in 2001, at the House of Commons, the local Liverpool MP complained, saying their release was causing damage to the people of Liverpool. There was a long investigation, which may or may not have included the gangsters trying to bribe people to make this all go away. But it was discovered that the firearms that they helped the police find were actually all planted by people who work for Hayes in order to get him an early release. In 2008, Hayes and Bennett were found guilty of, quote, perverting the course of justice and sentenced to 20 and 22 years, respectively. Because,
Wow.
the thing is, he found a loophole, I guess. Didn't quite work, but Jesus. For reasons I don't know, Hayes was released in 2019. So what does Hayes have to do with Jill Dando? Well, an undercover officer who infiltrated Hayes' gang recorded conversations with one of Hayes' dealers in 2004 that mentioned Jill's murder. The dealer said his girlfriend asked him about it, saying, quote, "Crime Watch, you know about that, don't you?" To which he responded, quote, "All I said to her was I knew there was a contract out on her. I think it comes from Scotland. That's all I said." In another conversation, the dealer claimed that the Scottish guns courier that they dealt with was found to be in possession of the same type of bullets that were used to kill Jill Dando. The bullets in question were some sort of modified round that were found to have 6 distinct markings or indentations around the circumference, which appeared to be created by some sort of hand tool. The drug dealer told the undercover officer that the ammunition he was speaking of, quote, "They had a mark on the bottom or something like that. They were the same bullets. There were 1,000 of them, came from Scotland." The dealer then added that some of those modified rounds found their way to John Hayes. Operation Oxborrow was allegedly given this information in 2005, but as far as I can tell, never spoke to Hayes about it and never compared the bullets from Jill Dando's murder to anything in Hayes's possession. Which, in a case where investigators are desperate to find out what happened, this felt like at least some sort of lead, even though I can't think of what Hayes's motive would have been.
Yeah.
But while we're on the topic of UK drug dealers, let's jump to theory number 3. Kenneth Noy, a British criminal who stole 26 million British pounds or 34 million US dollars worth of gold from Brinksmat in 1983. That's $34 million worth in 1983. So now that's obscene. That's obscene. 11 gold bars were found at Noy's home, and he was convicted of robbery in July 1986, sentenced to 14 years, although he was released after 8. After his conviction, Noy shouted to the jury, quote, "I hope you all die of cancer."
Oh my God.
You were literally caught with the stolen item in your home. Come on.
Yeah, geez.
Yeah,
Jeez.
yeah. He also stabbed an undercover police officer 10 times in 1985, but somehow was acquitted on the grounds of self-defense.
Wow.
Yep. On May 19th, 1996, Danielle Cable, who was a new driver at the time, was driving her fiance's van when it almost collided with Noy's Land Rover at the M25 and M20 interchange. Noy got out of his vehicle at the traffic light and punched Danielle's fiance, Stephen Cameron, in the face. The two men started to fight when Noy went back to his car, grabbed a knife, and stabbed Stephen twice, penetrating his heart and liver. Noy left Stephen on the side of the road and drove off. Stephen did not survive. He was just 21 years old.
Oh my God.
After Stephen's murder, Noy fled to Spain, where he was captured in August 1998. Danielle had been secretly taken to Spain and identified Noy from a distance. Danielle has since been put into witness protection after a threat was made on her life. Alan de Cabral, another witness to Stephen's murder, was found shot in his car in Kent in October 2000. Police somehow concluded that Alan's death was not connected to Noy in any way. However, Alan's murder is currently unsolved. But the fact that a witness died and then another witness was threatened, I mean,
yeah.
But if they have no proof, they have no proof. The most terrifying part to me is that while Noy was on the run, a police constable was arrested and sentenced to 11 years in jail for passing confidential information about police operations to Noy. The idea of a cop working with a criminal is horrifying to me. Noy was extradited back to the UK in May 1999 and went on trial. Danielle even testified against him. He was found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment. Noy claimed in court that he wasn't a violent man. He's only admitted to killing 2 people. And he believes that he didn't get a fair trial. But what's truly unfair is the fact that despite Noy clearly having money, he somehow received financial support throughout his appeal and was allowed to use legal aid during the trial, which ended up costing nearly 250,000 British pounds or 327,000 US dollars. It's the fact that he could afford that and it was taken from probably someone else who could have used it.
Yeah, exactly.
Noy tried to appeal his conviction numerous times to no effect. In June 2019, he was released from prison after serving 20 years of his life sentence. So it's nice to know that he's just out there walking around. But as we asked in the last theory, what does this have to do with Jill Dando? Well, Jill interviewed Danielle about the attack, so police thought that maybe Noy would believe that Jill knew Danielle's new identity or possibly where to find her. It's a stretch, but since another witness in Stephen Cameron's murder was also murdered, it wouldn't be unheard of for another witness in the case to be targeted. But again, police claim Noy had nothing to do with the witness's murder, so I guess I'm just speculating that. But Jill interviewed Danielle about the crime on an episode of Crime Watch. The interview struck a chord with the public, and honestly, maybe that was just enough to make her a target for someone like Noy. At the time of Jill's murder, Noy was in a Spanish prison, but some of his associates claim Noy was connected to a contract killer from Spain. I don't know the killer's name, but it was suggested he was hired by that he hired a local man to drive a Range Rover and wait near Jill's Gowan flat. And when Jill arrived, the man would signal the killer. It is said that they didn't know the address of her fiance, so they had to do it at Jill's Gowan home. After Jill's murder, the killer allegedly scrapped the car at a nearby breaker's yard near the Gatwick airport and immediately left the UK. A source tipped off police, claiming they overheard the killer in a pub saying he was looking to rebuild his reputation with certain criminals in the UK. The police allegedly had not only the name of this killer, but also his address and phone number. But for whatever reason, they never contacted him. I assume that they were somehow able to rule the contract killer out without having to speak to him, or else their investigation wasn't nearly as thorough as they claimed, allegedly.
Yeah.
During Operation Oxborrow, investigators said they looked into every case that Jill did on Crime Watch and they found no motive. Maybe they missed the Danielle Cable, Kenneth Noy connection, or maybe they genuinely didn't see it as credible. I don't know. Another theory, and this is where we're going to get my pronunciations are going to go south. She's just doing her best. She's getting by.
Getting by.
Another theory was that Jill was murdered by someone related to Serbia. Around the time of Jill's murder, Serbian leader Slobodan Milosevic was attempting an ethnic cleansing against the Kosovo Albanians. People were being driven out of their homes. Just 20 days before her death, Jill made a public charity appeal on behalf of the refugees. Some believe that may have angered Milosevic enough to put a hit on her. I doubt it. I don't think that she's the only newsreader who publicly sympathized with the refugees. But quickly, let's take a historical side note. Yugoslavia was a country in Southeast Europe that was created in 1918. After a political and economic crisis in the 80s and the rise of nationalism, Yugoslavia broke up along its borders into 5 countries: Yugoslavia, Croatia, Slovenia, Macedonia, and Bosnia. In 2003, the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia was known as Serbia and Montenegro until 2006, when they became independent states. In 2008, Kosovo declared independence from Serbia. Slobodan Milosevic served as the president of Serbia within Yugoslavia from 1989 to 1997 and president of the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia from 1997 to 2000. Milosevic was later charged with war crimes in connection with the Bosnian War, the Croatian War of Independence, and the Kosovo War by the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. This made Milosevic the first sitting head of state to be charged with war crimes. People protested Milosevic, and it is estimated that between 50,000 and 200,000 people deserted the Yugoslav People's Army because he was the one in control. He resigned from the presidency after a disputed presidential election in September 2000 and was later arrested in March 2001 on suspicion of abuse of power, embezzlement, and corruption. The initial investigation failed to find any evidence. There was a 5-year trial in which Milosevic conducted his own defense, but before a verdict could be reached, Milosevic died from a heart attack in his prison cell in March 2006. During the Kosovo War in 1999, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, known simply as NATO, carried out an aerial bombing campaign against the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. The airstrike lasted from March 24th until June 10th, when the Yugoslav armed forces withdrew from Kosovo. One of the buildings in particular one of the bombings, rather, in particular, was the bombing of the Belgrade headquarters of Radio Television Serbia, or RTS. During Operation Allied Force, NATO bombed the RTS on the night of April 23rd, 1999. 16 RTS employees, including security workers, makeup artists, and technicians, were killed in the blast. Many people were trapped for days. The station returned to the air less than 24 hours later from a secret location. NATO believed that it was necessary to, quote, disrupt and degrade the command, control, and communications network. The Yugoslav government said that the building was not a legitimate military target as it served no military purpose. Many opposed the attack, and to this day, the RTS building is left as it was, which I assume must be a painful reminder for the loved ones who suffered the most during that bombing. In 2002, the general manager of RTS was sentenced to 10 years in prison because he knew that the building could be bombed, and yet he didn't order the workers to evacuate the building.
Oh, wow.
A NATO side note.
Thank you.
As part of Operation Allied Force, NATO bombed the People's Republic of China embassy in Belgrade on May 7th, 1999. The US government first claimed the victims were intelligence agents, but later admitted the bombing was actually an accident because they meant to bomb the Yugoslav Federal Directorate for Supply and Procurement. It was nearby. It was close. It was an accident. During the attack, 20 people were injured and 3 journalists were killed, including, and I apologize, Xiao Yunwang, Zhu Xinghu, and Zhu Ying. The RTS bombing happened April 23rd. Jill Dando was murdered April 26th. Is it possible her death was somehow a retaliation of the bombing? Aircraft from the United States, the United Kingdom, France, Canada, and Spain conducted the bombings against fixed and pre-selected targets. Is it possible someone or some group retaliated against the UK for this bombing? I mean, you think if they're going to retaliate, they'd go to the country which was closest, which would have been France, as it's 1,782 kilometers or 1,107 miles away. But maybe the suspect came up with a plan to retaliate against a large television company, and they basically took the first flight or train or whatever transportation they could. London would have been the next closest at just over 2,000 kilometers or 1,300 miles away. Is it possible that Jill Dando was more popular than any French or Spanish newsreader, or that the suspect specifically wanted retaliation against the BBC? Anything is possible. Like, was the suspect someone acting of their own volition, or were they given orders by someone else? Some believe the orders came right from Slobodan Milosevic. People already thought that he was potentially guilty of embezzlement and corruption, but would he have someone killed? Well, in the summer of 2000, former Serbian President Ivan Stambolic was kidnapped. His body was found in 2003, and in June 2006, the Supreme Court of Serbia ruled that Milosevic had ordered Stambolic's murder. Wow. He was also later accused of ordering the murders of numerous government officials, including a defense minister, the Jet Airways director, and the high police official. So it's more than possible that Milosevic could order such a thing, and maybe he sent someone from Serbia, or maybe he got someone who was already living in the UK. In 1999, there were thousands of Serbians living in London, and many of them were furious with NATO about the bombing. There were massive public protests about it afterwards. And Jill wasn't the only journalist murdered. On April 11th, just 15 days before Jill's murder, TV presenter Slavko Kuruvia was shot dead by 2 masked men in the front of his house in Belgrade, Serbia.
Okay.
Just days before he was killed, the Serbian president's wife said that Slavko was, quote, state enemy number 1. After his relationship with Milosevic and his regime had deteriorated. Many believe that Slavko was a target due to his public disapproval of Milosevic. 46-year-old Milan Pantic was killed June 11th, 2011. He was struck on the head with a blunt object at the entrance of his home in Jagodina, Serbia. Milan was a correspondent for a daily newspaper and had been receiving threatening phone calls prior to his death. It is said that the calls were regarding the articles that Milan had written about the corruption and crime under Milosevic. I'm realizing I said he was killed in 2011. He was killed in 2001. My apologies. In 2005, former Interior Minister said, quote, Milan Pantovic was not supposed to be killed, only intimidated. He was killed by mistake, a mistake made by those who were sent to scare him.
Wow.
Somehow, Milan's murder is still officially unsolved.
Wow. Wow.
Yep. On September 10th, 2000, Albanian journalist 47-year-old Shefki Popova was shot and then stabbed at the entrance of his home in Kosovo. And while this person wasn't a journalist, on the same day that Shefki was killed, 58-year-old Recep Lucy, a prominent Albanian architect, was shot 6 times in the back at his front door in Pristina, Kosovo. Investigators said it was a mafia-style killing. Just prior to his death, Recep was working on signing demolition orders for illegal buildings. Less than 10 weeks later, on November 23rd, 2000, 47-year-old Zemail Mustafa was shot in the entrance of his apartment in Pristina. At the time of his death, Zemail was the senior media officer or advisor to the president of Kosovo. At the time of his death, he had recently written newspaper columns denouncing the criminal violence in Kosovo. On December 28th, 2002, 36-year-old journalist Tigran Nagdalian was shot in the head at the entrance to his parents' home in Yerevan, Armenia. 6 suspects were arrested in March 2003, and 13 people were charged with his murder. 6 were acquitted, but 7 were handed sentences. A businessman and a former Armenian prime minister were found guilty of ordering the hit, and both given 15 years. The man who admitted to doing the actual hit got 7 years because his was reduced because he helped the prosecution. And sadly, I could go on and on about journalists who were killed or went missing in and around this same time frame. There were 15 Serb and Albanian journalists who were killed or went missing during the Kosovo War between August 1998 and May 2005. None of their cases have been solved, and 5 of their bodies have never been found. And while the idea of Jill Dando's murder being carried out by a political hitman may seem unlikely to you, the National Criminal Intelligence Service, or NSIS, basically the British FBI, made a report that claims the gunman responsible for Jill's murder traveled to Britain via Germany and France. If they felt strongly about it, you'd think that means they have a good idea as to who the shooter was. The report also found bullets with similar markings as the ones used in the Dando case were also used in executions in Bayern, Germany, which were possibly ordered by Serbian warlord Arkan. The bullets, of course, were never compared, and no one in the British police traveled to Serbia to investigate. Arkan, who is terrifying, had a paramilitary organization called Arkan's Tigers that was linked to the Serbian National Service and possibly to leader Slobodan Milosevic. In the 70s and 80s, Arkan was Interpol's most wanted for robberies and murders across Europe. The International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia issued an indictment against Arkan in September 1997 for war crimes of genocide against the Bosnian Muslim population, crimes against humanity, and grave breaches of the Geneva Conventions. The warrant was not made public until March 31st, 1999. Around this time, Arkan went to a Hyatt hotel in Belgrade and ordered all of the Western journalists to immediately leave the country. So we know he didn't like journalists, specifically non-local journalists. There was also, in a documentary that I watched, some super ballsy reporter asked Arkan, he made a comment to him about how do you deal with the fact that basically that people think you're a killer? And the look in this man's eyes when he stopped and went, "Oh, what makes you say that?" And the reporter's trying to step back and be like, "Oh, no, I mean," and he was just like, "Oh yeah, I'd love to know where you heard that, because I have no idea what you're talking about." And it's just oh, I can't, there was cameras and a TV and many, many miles between me, and I was uncomfortable. So I can't imagine being that reporter, being that close to that man. He's terrifying. It is believed that Slavko Karuvia was murdered by the Serbian Secret Service on orders from Arkan. Slavko was only 49 at the time of his death. In 2014, 2 people were finally arrested for the murder of Slavko Karuvia, and 2 others were named as suspects, including the man who was the head of the State Security Service in Belgrade from 1998 to 2001. However, it should be noted that according to a former Serbian secret agent, all the reports concerning Slavko Karuvia were ordered to be destroyed on October 5th, 2000, the very day that Milosevic fell from power. I don't know if that's a coincidence or not.
Yeah, I don't know either.
Yeah. Radislava or Dada Vujansinovic was a reporter and journalist for the Serbian news magazine Duga. On one of her most famous pieces was a sarcastic article about Arkan and covered crime and corruption in the Milosevic government. She also reported on the Balkan conflicts and the Croatian and Bosnian wars. Dada was found dead from a shotgun wound in her apartment, April 8th, 1994. Police ruled her death a suicide. In January 2009, a ballistics expert concluded that Dada's wounds could not have been self-inflicted. Emotional side note: the fact that Dada Vujansinovic was found dead of a shotgun wound on the same day that Kurt Cobain was found dead of a shotgun wound is not lost on me. This episode is trying to overwhelm me with nostalgia, and I don't care for the witchery of all of it.
Yeah.
Just make it not sad nostalgia. Make it oh, that's charming and fun, like Operation Oxborrow. Keep it at that level. But then it's like Kurt Cobain and Princess Diana, and I'm like, and I'm back there.
Yeah,
I get it. Oof. Because again, I'll say it. It's been a little over a week since that last episode that we did, and I am not doing well on that still in regards to Mr. Hawkins. I was at a family dinner. I'm already off the rails. It's fine. Oh God, this might be the episode I cry. We were flipping channels, and there was the Foo Fighters live at Wembley, and I was having a reaction. And my father-in-law was like, "Oh, does she not like them? Should I change it?" My husband just did no, she's going through it. And yeah, it was really hard, and I did not do well. And then I was like, I can't. And then it was a moment where Taylor was singing, and I was like, nope, I can't be here. I can't be here. And then the Grammys happened, and I was like, I can't I'm not interested in the Grammys. We don't need to watch that. Seeing that they won awards, could not have been happier for them. Well earned, because that album fucking slaps. And I can say that because I got part of it tattooed on my body.
Of course.
But watching that tribute,
yeah,
hearing Trevor Noah speak of him, I was not, that's when I started going, oh, I shouldn't watch this. And then the tribute started and the drums kicked in.
Mm-hmm.
And as a fan, you know what song that is. And I broke and openly sobbed in my living room watching that. So I did not do well. It's weird. And I saw a thing, and I'm going to waste our time just briefly to read it to make myself feel better in the grand scheme of things, because I felt like it was relevant. It said, grieving someone you didn't know is still grief. It simply means they were magic enough to impact the lives of strangers, and you are open-hearted enough to receive love from a stranger's song. After I saw that, this is the photo that I found with it.
Oh, God.
So I'm going to say, still not doing well.
Yeah.
That quote, I'm not sure where it's from. It was in some random post that I saw, but it resonated.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, I get it. I have said for years, like, it's, if a celebrity dies, like someone I've never met, it feels weird to be sad about it. And like when Betty White died, and I was like, I didn't know her. Like, I shouldn't be sad about it. My husband was like, it's okay to be sad about it. And then I just broke. That's it entirely. It's someone's magic was big enough to radiate to people. And yeah, I took that one to heart, and I can't. And look at that. I rocked myself from the edge back.
It's masterful to watch.
It's going to be.
I'm with you. I'm still not okay either. It's
really
going to be a really hard one. Yeah.
Well, and the fact that it's everywhere, like so many people and like so many musicians are mentioning him. Like, I just do a quick scroll on any social media and there's photos and all of that. And it's lovely. And it's great to see clips of him and things like that, but it's still so hard because, of course, I know what's going to break me again is when Dave Grohl officially releases a statement.
Yeah.
That is going to be it for me. I don't know how I'm going to handle that. I know he will at some point, but we all know I'm chomping at the bit to know how Dave is doing.
I'm gonna go out on a limb and say,
not well,
not great.
Yeah. It's a lot. It's a lot again. And Billie Eilish wearing that Taylor shirt. Bless her. And I'm going to say this, my apologies out loud to Billie Eilish. I've always been scared of you, but that's because I'm terrified of all teenage girls. But that goes back to my teen years, and that's not on you. And I'll say it, I'm a fan. I was blasting you earlier and blasting your music rather. And God, it's nice to like scream about something. You know what I mean? She gets it. And to the man who made her write the lyrics to, what is that song?
Happier Than Ever?
Yeah. Whoever that's about, I will find you for what you did to her.
I just also want to say, without saying anything, I've had that song on repeat a few times.
Yep. Specifically, you've made all my moments your own. Yeah. That
Yeah.
there's just so much about her that resonates. And the fact that she also wrote, her and her brother, I believe, wrote lyrics and songs for the Disney Turning Red. They did as a boy band. Like, come on. That much talent should be illegal in someone that's old enough or young enough to be my child.
I know, it's unsettling at best. I get it.
Yeah. She feels like more of a grown-up than I do, but again, that's not the point. The point is, I've derailed us horribly.
It's okay. That's okay. It's what we do here. They're not anybody. They know.
They know. Just skip ahead a little bit. She'll be fine. She'll come around. Yeah. For those who did skip, I didn't cry, but someday there's going to be a really special episode that.
I really thought that I was letting her go. I was
know. I saw you sit back and like, here it is. You were the guru in the True Tory episode.
Yep.
There it is.
There it is.
Yeah.
Guru Singh.
Yeah.
Speaking of, yes, if anybody is a reality show fan, True Tory, the Tory spelling Dean McDermott. Oh my God. I'm out of it. Reality show. There is an episode where they see like a spiritual guru guy. And that is, I want to meet him. I'm thinking about making an appointment, but I'm scared.
Don't go alone.
I can't.
No.
Anyway.
Yeah. Well, again,
all right.
Now they know what happened, and now they can skip ahead, and here we are.
There you go.
And then they can act like this never happened.
Are we going back to Serbia, or are we moving on?
We're still in Serbia.
Great. I'm ready.
And hopefully, for the sake of everyone, I won't have any more names to butcher. I spoke too soon. The point is, doing my best.
Doing great.
So I have maybe been heavily implying that someone like Warlord Arcan could somehow be involved in the murder of Jill Dando. Mm-hmm. Some have suggested that if Arcan wanted to kill a journalist to send a message, there were so many other targets that were easier to access than Jill Dando. And that is true. But I also think Jill was such a prominent public figure. Her death would have been way more publicized than most.
Right.
Not meaning any shade. I'm just saying that's kind of how the news cycle works.
Right.
After a cold case review in 2008 by police concluded Jill was killed by a professional assassin in a, quote, hard contact execution.
Wow.
Because the gun was pressed so tightly to her head. In 2012, another cold case review named Arcan as a suspect in the Dando case. However, in January 2000, Arcan was assassinated.
Interesting.
Dobrisav Gavrich, a 23-year-old junior police mobile brigade member, pleaded innocent, but was convicted and sentenced to 19 years in prison. The verdict was overturned by the Supreme Court because of a lack of evidence and vagueness of the first trial process. A new trial was held in 2006, and Gavrich was sentenced to 30 years for assassinating Arcan, which feels like Arcan's reach is powerful even after death.
Yeah.
The police claimed that if someone had in fact killed Jill Dando in retaliation for the RTS attack, then they would have taken credit for it. And since police claimed that no one took credit, they didn't see this theory as legitimate and didn't look into it any further. Or should I say at all? According to a documentary that I watched called Jill Dando, The 20-Year Mystery, it seems like the police didn't look into Serbia in any way. According to the documentary, there were more than 100 documents in the police files that mentioned Serbia. And yet again, no officer ever went there to investigate in any way. In the files from Operation Oxborrow, a call was made to the BBC at 11:09 a.m. on the day of Jill's murder that said, quote, "Because your government, and in particular your Prime Minister Blair, butchered 17 innocent young people who work like makeup artists, electrical technical engineers, and these type of people. He butchered, we butcher back. The first one you had yesterday, the next one will be Tony Hall. Tony Hall was the director of news at the BBC at the time. I also think I misspoke. I said 11:09 on the day of her murder. I meant 11:09 the day after her murder. And the call said the first one was yesterday. The next will be Tony Hall, the director of news. The caller was said to be male with an Eastern European accent, and his voice was very calm and matter of fact. Could it have been a prank call? Maybe. Could it have been someone who simply believed Jill's murder was retaliation? Sure. But I still think it's a credible enough lead to at the very least look into. During that call, the caller made a reference to calling the day before, so logs were checked, and sure enough, a call came in at 3 p.m. on the day of Jill's murder by a man who sounded pretty much the same as the other phone call. This time the caller said, quote, "Tell your prime minister in Belgrade, 15 killed, so 14 more to go." The police labeled the call as non-relevant. And I know it's easy for me to sit here and look at that and question why they didn't look into it. I'm sure they received thousands of calls regarding this case, but when they weren't getting anywhere in the investigation, I'm surprised they didn't look into every single possibility. There was even information in case files that mentioned a Serbian national known to hang out at a specific bar in London who was potentially involved in Jill's murder. Police received this information 3 days after Jill's murder, and yet the police inspector in charge of the case, Hamish Campbell, gave a press conference 3 months later and claimed they hadn't received any word that Serbia could be involved in any way. Is it possible that someone beneath Campbell saw the tip and blew it off and didn't pass it on? Sure. But it's also possible he saw it and made the choice himself that it wasn't relevant. The tip said the man was tall and had a tattoo of a swallow on his neck. According to police files, they visited the pub once, didn't see the tattooed man, so they just never returned. Police said they went through the entire caseload twice, but the fact that they didn't catch something like this makes me wonder if they actually did go through everything. It is a lot of information, so I shouldn't be surprised something was overlooked. Police still believe that Jill's murder wasn't connected to the RTS bombing, saying that there wouldn't have been enough time for Serbia to plan out and send someone to do the job. But what about a Serbian living in London or somebody else living in London who, would take the money to do whatever they were asked? I think it's more than possible. To me, retaliation is a huge motive and probably the most convincing motive of all the ones I've seen so far in my research. But again, we currently have no proof, so we're just speculating. And speaking of speculating, I want you to take just a bit of a leap with me. The final theory isn't the police's theory. It's mine.
Yes.
I'm looking at a person who, as far as I can tell, was never a suspect by the police. But the person that stuck out the most to me was Jill's neighbor, Richard Hughes. Now, I don't have any proof that Hughes has done anything or that he was involved in any way. This is purely speculation. For the sake of leaving no stone unturned, as you may recall from earlier in the episode, before I started a breakdown, Richard Hughes was the neighbor that told police he heard Jill's car pull up, heard her arm the car alarm, seconds later, heard her scream. Hughes later told police he saw a man running from the scene, and police released an EFIT or sketch of the possible suspect based on Hughes's description. But what if the reason the killer was able to get away so quickly was because he was Jill's neighbor? Jill lived at number 29. Hughes and his wife were right next door at 31. And the houses are packed in tightly on the street like row houses, so they basically share a wall. There was 15 minutes between the time Jill got home and the time she was discovered by another neighbor. 15 minutes is plenty of time to get home, change, hide the murder weapon to dispose of later, and then act surprised when an ambulance shows up. Again, I'm speculating because I am untrusting in nature.
Yep.
The problem that I have with my own theory is, what would his motive be? Unfortunately, I could not find out much about Hughes or his wife, so I'm at a loss for a motive. Hughes and his wife moved into their flat just 4 months prior to Jill's murder, so they probably never really interacted with Jill that much, although Hughes claims they spoke to one another and, quote, visited each other's houses, which is interesting because at that point, I think she was pretty much moved in with her fiance, but who knows? But one could argue, were Jill and Hughes having a secret affair and he couldn't stand her ending it and moving away? From what I can tell, there was no affair of any kind going on for Jill, but again, this is me leaving no stone unturned. Is it possible that Hughes became infatuated with her and snapped when he saw that her house was for sale? Maybe he chose that specific day because he didn't know how soon the house would sell and he'd lose his window of access. Again, speculating. Police believe that Jill wasn't followed to the house because they checked 191 CCTV cameras, so it's safe to assume the assailant was waiting for Jill at her house. And Hughes was right next door and even admitted to hearing her car pull up. Police made the argument that since Jill no longer lived at the address, the suspect would have to wait around and just hope that Jill showed up. But during court testimony, Richard Hughes said that Jill came to her home, quote, once a week, usually on a Monday, between 10 a.m. and 12 p.m. Jill was murdered on a Monday at 11:30.
Interesting.
Right in his specific window. So Hughes clearly had a good idea as to when Jill would be arriving at her Gowan address. With that in mind, if Richard knew the schedule, it was possible for someone else to learn it as well, or possible for them to get the information from Hughes without him possibly even realizing the significance of giving that information away. And then there's his changing story. When originally questioned, Hughes said he was working at the front of his house when he heard Jill's car pull up, heard her alarm. But in court, Hugh claims he was in an upstairs bedroom when he heard the car alarm. He said it was similar to my wife's car alarm. And he said it was familiar because, quote, I knew her make of car as my wife has a similar model. So was he at the front of the house or in an upstairs bedroom? It is possible that the upstairs bedroom is in a part of the house closest to the street, which would technically be considered the front of the house. To me, when I hear the front of the house, that means outside. I guess to me, that means out front. But again, it could just be like a, for lack of better wording, like a language barrier sort of thing. But if he was inside, he heard a scream and said it was 30 seconds after the car alarm, but didn't think to look outside. And at Barry George's trial, Hughes said, quote, it was a female scream. I did not consider it significant at the time. I thought it was someone surprising somebody. The next thing I heard was the clicking of the gate. Now, according to later statements given by Hughes, he did look out the window and saw a man between 30 and 40 years old, about 5'11" or 1.8 meters, clean shaven with a dark, thick mop of hair that reached to his collar. A quote from Hughes, quote, I thought he had a mobile phone in his right hand. He was wearing a dark waxed coat. 5 other witnesses later also claimed to have seen a clean-shaven man in a long, dark coat. And of course, I find this fascinating because first he said that the scream didn't seem like a problem, so he didn't look into it. Then he said he did look into it and gave an exact description of the man he saw leaving the scene. Hughes says the man allegedly walked left towards Fulham Palace Road Quote, he was moving briskly. I could see half his face. Hughes claims that shortly after, he heard some women talking outside. So he went out to see what they were doing. And to me, you hear a scream and you don't look outside, but you hear a group of women talking. And that is your instinct to go outside? Hughes claims that the women asked him to identify the body. He said it was, in fact, Jill Dando, and, quote, she wasn't conscious when I saw her. Again, I have no proof that Richard Hughes has done anything illegal, but based on his easy access and his changing story, you have to wonder, or at least speculate. So before we go, I want to give a few updates in a section that I've simply titled, Where Are They Now?
Where are they now?
I never, ever tire of that.
Thank you.
Barry George, the only person to ever be arrested in the Dando case. Not much is known about him except he is currently living in Ireland. It has been said that George received no compensation for being wrongfully imprisoned for 8 years. The Justice Secretary said George had not sufficiently proven his innocence.
Interesting.
Jill's former fiance, Alan Farthing, has since had a bit of a career boost. In 2008, he was appointed to assist and later succeed Marcus Setchell as the Queen's personal gynecologist and surgeon. And when Setchell retired in 2013, Alan took his place. In fact, Alan delivered all 3 of Kate Middleton's babies, who we know as George, Charlotte, and Louis. I assume it's Louis. Is it Louis?
I think it would be Louis, but
because I never know. I never know. It feels like incredible synergy that I spent most of this research feeling overwhelmed with the thought that Jill Dando reminded me of Princess Diana. And then Jill's fiance ends up working for the Queen and delivering Princess Diana's grandchildren.
Yeah.
And Barry George was found on the grounds where Princess Diana lived. Again,
and one of the babies was named George.
Okay. This is
weird.
Yeah, it's all wild to me. In 2003, Alan met a woman named Janet Stoll, where she was training to become a doctor. I don't know officially when they started dating, but after a brief engagement, they married in March 2008 in a small private ceremony. Jill's friends and family were extremely pleased for Alan. In November 2010, Alan and Janet welcomed a son. Jill's father, Jack, sadly has since passed away in February 2009. Her brother, Nigel Dando, worked as a newspaper journalist in the 70s before moving to BBC Radio Bristol. He remained there until retiring in 2017. Jill's Crime Watch colleague, Nick Ross, suggested the idea of an academic institute in Jill's honor. So together with her fiance, Alan Farthing, they raised almost 1.5 million British pounds or 1.9 million US dollars. The Jill Dando Institute of Crime Science was founded at University College London on the second anniversary of Jill's death in April 2001. The BBC television Ground Force team created a memorial garden in Jill's honor using colors and plants that were special to her. The garden is located at Grove Park in Weston-super-Mare, where Jill was born. The BBC also set up a bursary award in Jill's memory, which enables one student each year to study broadcast journalism at University College Falmouth. The first recipient of the award was Sophia Long, who is now a presenter on BBC News.
Hey.
Weston College opened a new university campus in 2007 on the site of the former Broad Oak Sixth Form Center, where Jill was once head girl. The Sixth Form building has been dedicated to her and named the Jill Dando Center. In the end, Operation Oxborrow considered more than 2,100 suspects, interviewed more than 5,000 people, took more than 2,500 statements, and read more than 14,000 emails. So on the surface, it seems as though the investigation was incredibly thorough. But were they? There were allegedly 100 possible suspects that were never successfully traced, including members of the Serbian Secret Service, the IRA, and a British gangster who was based in Spain. 11 strange men were spotted on Gowan Avenue the day Jill was murdered, and to this day, none of them have been identified. A colleague of Jill's, named Alice Beers, said that both she and Jill had received threatening letters just weeks before Jill's death, including letters threatening rape and kidnapping. Alice said the police never contacted her at any point throughout the investigation, which is interesting because they claimed they spoke to and investigated all of Jill's friends, family, colleagues, and all 486 people in Jill's Filofax. And if that's true, then how did they not speak with a person who worked with Jill at the BBC? So were they really thorough, or did they just say they were due to the high-profile nature of the case? Either way, Jill Dando deserved better than to have her life cut so tragically short. And since there have been no arrests in this case since Barry George in 2000, sadly, I don't think we'll ever know the truth of what happened to Jill Dando. Her case remains open. Reporting for True Crime and Cocktails, I'm Christy Oxborrow.
Well, listen, I mean, I have so many thoughts. I can't wait. I'm like a horse in the starting stall. I'm ready to go. So let's take one last break, get another drink, hit the can one last time, and we'll be right back to wrap it up on the Jill Dando episode of True Crime and Cocktails. All right, last clap. Here we go on 3. 1, 2, 3. Welcome back to this episode of True Crime and Cocktails. We're discussing Jill Dando. We're going to get into my thoughts. I mean, there's so much to get through, and I just can't wait. You talked about Crime Watch off the top. That made me think of Crime Stoppers in Canada. Although it isn't a show, right? It's just those commercials, isn't it?
I think it's just like it feels like the wrong word, but I was going to say company. But yet I think they're like now I was going to say league. God, Christy, this isn't the Avengers. Like,
I wish it was.
We could use the help.
Being like, call Crime Stoppers if you've seen this. Like, I think they were commercials though. I don't think it was.
Oh, it's still a thing.
Yeah,
there are still Crime Stoppers. Like, yeah, I think in all of North America. I think.
Really?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Oh, I stand by it. I have mentioned them on a few episodes.
But they're in the States?
Yeah.
Huh. Well,
yeah, it's like a main number that it's like you call this. I think it's the same number everywhere, but it's like you call Crime Stoppers. So I assume it's. I'm gonna go with League.
Okay. All right. A crime league. I like it. I like it a lot. Okay. Few things. I'm gonna get right into it. One of the first things you brought up when we were talking immediately about what motives could have been and who could have had a motive to kill her, you brought up this pedophile ring at the BBC. And then it was like, but there was no proof. If I know anything and we know anything about those kinds of things, I feel like could be a vested interest in making that go away. So
100%.
I wouldn't rule that out right away. And that's going to be something you hear me say quite a few times over the next few minutes, is that I just feel like anytime there's quote, no evidence, it just always makes me go, is there no evidence? Or is there all kinds of evidence? And that's the whole issue.
Yeah.
Because it just also feels impossible for something that seemingly had a lot of resources behind it to then just be like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
In terms of your Gary Glitter, why are we using his songs? I wrote, there's literally so many songs.
So many songs.
There's so many songs. Just use ones that aren't by pedophiles, rapists, please.
Ideally.
I beg of you. I beg of you. Okay. Barry George. I have so many thoughts that I don't even want to waste my time on with that man. But the idea of him keeping notes with the names, addresses, and some license plate numbers of women in his area.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is chilling. All of the lies is chilling. It's interesting to me. the proof being this bullet residue. And then as you're saying that 1 in 100 people or whatever can have that on their clothing, which feels, terrifying. Cause then it's like, well, then I don't want to get accused of a crime I didn't commit. My God, that's my biggest fear.
Yes.
So it's interesting that they arrested him to me with no evidence. They didn't have a proper motive other than him being a crazed fan. They didn't have a murder weapon. They didn't have any proof, it feels like, other than, I mean, that's a wild swing. And I know it happens, but I was just surprised that it seems like they really just wanted to put it on him. Now, I also just wanted to mention, obviously we both know that Asperger's is not the term that we use anymore, but I know that Christy was being accurate to the time that at that time, 2001, that would have been the terminology that was used. So I just wanted to make that clear. We weren't using that because we didn't know that it's an antiquated term. It was just that it was accurate to the time frame. So just wanted to point that out.
And for clarification, my apologies for not being clear, or for just maybe I shouldn't have used it at all for the sake of the time period. But
yes,
but again,
it was not it was an honest mistake or choice or whatever you wanted to say. It wasn't used in with any sort of nothing behind it, is my point.
No.
Okay. Princess Diana's car registration numbers found in his apartment. Him being found on the Kensington Palace grounds. What's up with Barry George? Him having this now listen, I'm going to speak, and I think that people know me well enough to know that I'm about to speak freely. And I am not suggesting like that it is impossible that he had the IQ score that he did. When an IQ score of 70 is not the highest, that's fine. And I'm not suggesting that someone with that IQ wouldn't be able to do the things that he did. Of course, someone with that IQ could. But I only pose that it's like, how did he have that information? I mean, 1999, 2001, that era was not the internet that we know now. That's not a time where you can find that information. And I don't feel, unless you have access to the equivalent of a UK DMV computer, like, how would you have that information? That to me, there's something there. And I know that this is going to sound absolutely batshit, but I don't rule out, and you're going to love this, a classic Lauren Ash, they all did it, that there is something not right about this. I'm going to say it. I'm skipping ahead, but I'm going to say it real quick, and then I'm going to go away, and then I'm going to come back to it because I know you're going to need a minute to sit with it. But
sure.
Was her husband or her fiance ever a suspect? Yeah, I went there. I'm just asking.
I assume not.
Yeah. It's just interesting to me, go with me, that Barry George was found on Kensington Palace grounds as many times as he did. He had Princess Diana's car registration numbers in his possession.
Yes.
And Alan Farthing, Jill Dando's fiance, ended up being the Queen's personal gynecologist, birthing the babies in the royal family.
Yeah.
I am not saying that means anything. What I'm saying is that is a lot of synchronicity and coincidence, that it feels like a lot of energy there is all I'm pointing out. Is it possible that there is some connection with with many people here? Is it possible that?
Sure.
Who knows? Again, I'm not accusing Alan Farthing of anything. I'm just saying, was he ever looked into? Often when, again, anyone is murdered, the closest partner is often very deeply looked into, because we know statistically speaking that is usually the number one chance. And then the only other reason I brought up the specific of Barry George's IQ is only because, again, I want to make this clear again. I am not suggesting that you have to have a high IQ to pull off the things that he did whatsoever. I also think the IQ system is bullshit, by the way. I don't think that that's any bearing on someone's true intelligence. But I also feel like, how did they test him? How was he tested? Was he tested multiple times throughout his life? Was this one specific test? Who was it given by? I also feel like if this is somebody who has the means, access, etc., to get Princess Diana's car registration numbers, could be possible that maybe he tried to throw the IQ test. Just saying, Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. There's just something there, and I could be completely wrong. And please, I hope no one is taking offense to what I'm saying. I'm just saying that it doesn't add up to me. There's something there that doesn't add up to me. How would he have access to that kind of thing? How did he get on Kensington Palace grounds? That's no easy feat.
5 times.
5 times. And again, I'm not suggesting that that has anything to do with IQ. It doesn't. But what I'm saying is that it feels like there's another layer to him. Is he just this crazed fan, pathological liar type? Or is that all a front for being something else, is my point. Is this all this persona that is being put forward? Is he working for the Serbian government? You know what I'm saying? Like, is there some sort of crossover here? Because it just feels odd to me, the details of all of this feeling like it kind of connects to each other in some odd way. Anyway, but more on that in a minute, obviously.
Sure.
The bullets never being compared, wild. The fact that they were never compared to this potential first gentleman who may have hired a hitman, the fact that they were never compared to the Serbian connection, the second hitman connection, feels like there's something there. Feels like, again, there's some sort of cover up on some level happening. That feels like one of the first things you would do if you knew that it would. And again, these other reports came out from the police saying we've reopened the cold case. We've looked at it. It was definitely a hit. This was a hit. Well, then why wouldn't you at that point try and obtain some of those bullets? Maybe impossible at that point, but like, that feels like that's the next step. That's a rudimentary to me choice, which to that, I don't call incompetence ever when it's that simple. To me, I call, again, cover up.
Sure.
Allegedly. Kenneth Noy. Every time you said Noy, I was waiting for you to say noise. Every single time. It was just all I could hear. Just know that. And what a charming thing to say about a true monster. My God. I mean, killing that poor man, horrifying. The fact also that the police did nothing about that. My God. There's so much here in the Serbian stuff that I put like a big star next to it. But then there was so much other stuff that came out that I was like, gosh, I know why people are fascinated by this case, because it's just like you could walk in circles with this. Okay. The specifics too about the phone calls that were coming in to the BBC around the time of her murder, saying it was retribution for Serbia. Here's another thought I had.
Yeah.
There's, of course, was it a prank? Was it someone who wasn't involved at all? I think that's, of course, possible. They often say, like, ISIS, for example, will take credit for terrorist things that have happened that actually weren't theirs, right? But it's part of their like business model to make it look like they're, doing all this terror. To be clear, they do a lot of things they say they do. They do terrible things, but it is also, again, a tactic that they can use. But then my other question was, is it possible? Because they're saying, well, there wouldn't have been enough time between the RTS situation and her murder. What if there's another person involved in all of this?
Okay.
Who is, and I'm going back to the way Barry George is presented, not this other potential like double life Barry George I was just suggesting, but let's say Barry George is exactly how he's been presented. Is it possible that there could be another type like that who is potentially Serbian or has an affinity for Serbia in some way, that just took it upon themselves as an individual citizen and said, I'm doing this for Serbia? Do you know what I mean? Is it possible it didn't come from a warlord or whoever, that it was just a citizen that was like, this is retribution, I'm doing this? And in a delusion, much like we've heard with some of Barry George's, I'm Freddie Mercury's cousin, for example, is it one of those things where this person thinks they're connected? Again, I throw that out just because we're throwing out absolutely anything, because this is infuriating because there's just so little evidence. Richard Hughes, when you said this is your theory, I got jazzed. Because he didn't sit right with me either, right from the beginning. And I wrote it down in the beginning. And then I was like, when you came back to him, I was like, thank God, because I'm going to come back to what I was just going to say, what I said in the beginning. Now, I know that you covered it when it was like, if we press a gun into somebody hard enough, the body does act as a silencer. You're not going to hear it as much.
Sure.
However, everybody also knows that with a silencer on a gun, it doesn't make it go completely mute. There is still a noise. And I just want to point out that this man says that he's hearing things like car alarms, screams, and just the sound of women talking. Now, granted, they may have been in an emotional state because they've obviously found Jill Dando very tragically. But to me, it feels, I'm going to say it, it feels unlikely that he wouldn't have heard something. I'm not saying it would have sounded like a full volume gunshot, but also, if anybody who's listening has ever been around a full volume gunshot, it's deafening. It is incredibly deafening. And like, you need, that's why you wear ear protection if you go to a gun range or whatever. Like, it is loud. So again, even with a silencer, and I'm not trying to be glib, I'm very tragically in this case, her being the silencer, it's so awful. It's not going to muffle it 100%. It's not going to, it's not going to muffle it 90%. You know what I mean? Like, you're still going to hear something, in my opinion. Now, here's my other point. I could be completely wrong, but you know as well as I do, test it out. Was he ever looked into? Was his home ever searched? Did they look for evidence of any sort of, to your point, he had time to change. Was there any sort of search done of his home for, anything? Just a routine. Can we take a look, sir? We'll get a warrant if we have to. Take a test, reenact it in some way using a dummy or whatever, and go into the house. See, can you hear it? Because again, to me, for somebody who's so attuned that he knows the specific sound of the specific car alarm for a specific car, that he could hear it from inside his house, potentially. Yeah. I know his story kept changing. I just find it hard to believe that there was absolutely zero sound. I also find it hard to believe that you heard a woman scream, even if it was in surprise and you didn't look. And to the point you made, but then in one version of his story, he did look because he saw someone allegedly running away. So something's not right with him either. And then you opened the door. You walked so baby girl could run. Go with me on this, because now I am going to go batshit. He moved in there 4 months prior to Jill's murder.
Yes.
He knew the car alarm. He knew her schedule. He knew when she came. He knew exact time. He knew an exact bracket of time on the day of the week, which was the exact bracket of time on the day of the week that she was murdered. Is it possible, rather than a secret affair, a secret infatuation, whatever, is this person working on some deep underground government spy for whatever government? I don't know. The Serbian government, the UK government, I don't know. But is it possible that he is involved in some way that either didn't involve her murder, he was set up to just watch because they knew that there was a hit out on this woman?
Interesting.
Or is it possible that this was a long game and this was an undercover agent of some kind and he did do it? If we know this was a hit, how do we know that that wasn't a very long game undercover hitman?
Oh, what caught me off guard and left me unsettled about this man, they showed clips of interviews with him in one of probably in both documentaries, but there was one in particular where I should have watched it again and written down exactly what he said, but he was telling the reporters, he was surrounded by them. He was telling them something about what had happened. And then a reporter said like, "Oh, you mean like this?" And he went, yeah, like that. Like, it just, like anything they said, he was like, "Oh, yep, that's exactly what happened." So it felt like he was letting them lead and then was just like, "Yep. And there's something about him that just didn't sit right with me. And you're right about the noise. He claimed he heard footsteps. He claimed he heard the gate clicking closed.
I'm sorry.
I never heard anything else. And again, you hear a scream, regardless as to whether you think it's a surprise or think it's nothing. You don't look at all. I call bullshit. If I hear a car like revving a little too loud or something, nosy neighbor here is going to be peeking out those curtains, like in a way nobody knows, of course, but like,
but it's human nature.
You hear a noise, you look. Yes. You hear any noise and you're like, what was that? And you look to investigate what it is.
And you're right. If he's saying, I heard footsteps, I heard a gate click, I am so sorry. But a gunshot is not muffled to the point of being completely mute. It's not in a vacuum.
Sure.
No way. I don't buy it. Again, these houses were close together, as you pointed out.
Yes.
I just feel something's up. It's also, again, like, I don't know. And I look, I don't even want to go much further because I'm creeping myself out, but it just feels again that with all of these theories, there's like ways that they're all could be intertwined, that it feels like it's this bigger thing. And, you know, the last thing I will say again is your point that you said towards the end, where you talked about this colleague of hers, that they were both getting these threatening letters and that the police never contacted her. Yet they said they had done all this work. That it's like, well, that seems impossible. If they'd gone through, you know, they quoted 14,000 emails and 2,100 suspects and interviewed, you know, all of these people. How could they miss her? Well, my point is that I just don't think that you do. You don't miss it. I think that's something, because we've done this show long enough to know, and we talk all the time about like, oh, another one bungled by law enforcement. Like we talk about that all the time. And I do think that is absolutely something that happens.
Yeah. And
I think that there's also times when law enforcement does do their job. But I also think there's times, and when we're talking about things that we know for a fact was a hit, as the cold case said, and we know there was ties to things like warlords, to things that are much bigger than, you know, some sort of, you know, discrepancy between neighbors or whatever. Like we're talking about a woman who was very well known. She was a public figure. She worked for the news. We know that journalists get targeted in a multitude of ways. It is a risky job, especially journalists who are traveling into different places. Not that she was, but you know what I'm saying? Like it just feels to me again, like when you're doing that level of an investigation, you don't miss something. I think if anything, it's overlooked deliberately. And I chill myself to the core by even suggesting it.
Yep.
Because again, it just feels like it's something bigger. Again, why was Barry George the patsy? I don't know. Like, again, but then he has this tie, it feels like, again, to monarchy. Again, the fact that her fiance did, the fact that, again, we're talking about these bigger things, Serbian nationals. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's
too much.
It's a lot. It's a lot. And again, the Richard Hughes of it all. Honest to God, if he had lived there for as long as she had, if he had lived there for years and years and he had all that detail and he knew the ins and outs and whatever, I don't think it would have like rubbed me the same way. But the fact that it had only been 4 months and he had all of that information and he was the one that they drew the sketch they were basing this all on, and he was the one who was whatever, doesn't sit. There's something, again, my instinct went crazy right away. Your instinct did. Where there's smoke, there's fire. Yeah. Again, we're not suggesting that proves that he did anything, but it just feels like something's up.
Oh yeah. And I Google mapped their houses because I'm not from there. My house and my neighbor's house, it's a completely different setup than what their houses are. And from the sidewalk where her car is parked to her house is such a shorter sidewalk than you imagine. Like, from the look of it, from her gate to her front door, maybe 5-6 feet.
Whoa. And
when you look at their two houses, there's her door, his door, and then there's about a half like cement wall in between them. Someone could have easily hopped over the wall to get home, or it would have been even quick to run all the way around, because that's like not even 20 feet to go from there all the way around to your own front door. So again, it's just, again, I know there's no proof. This is allegedly, but there's something off. Or did he see something? Is it as simple as he was paid for the information so they knew when, and he was paid and told, this is who you saw? And it's possible they were like, pick somebody that you see walking by and claim they looked like that person. And that there was, in fact, a well-dressed, clean-shaven man that was walking down the street at that point. So enough people saw him and were like, oh yeah, we saw the suspect. And it's like, maybe that guy had nothing to do with it. Maybe he was told, choose somebody that you see because you didn't see a thing. It's just, it's also so creepy to me to be like, oh, well, I know the sound of her car alarm because it's a similar car to my wife's. And it's like, okay, so how'd you know it wasn't your wife?
Yeah.
You heard the car alarm that sounds just like your wife's car alarm. And then you heard a scream, and there wasn't a part of you that went, oh my God, my wife came home and something happened. Maybe it's just me and I'm very paranoid. But if I heard something like that, I'd be like, there's been a murder.
Well,
Like
also,
if I hear any noise, if I hear what, like, we're talking even July 1st at dusk, and there's fucking fireworks. When I hear the first one, I'm like, was that a gunshot? No, Christy. It was fireworks and joy. But my instinct, and I know that's just me because I'm broken, my instinct is, you hear a noise like that, you're like, what's happened? Something bad has happened. And I mean, as a mother, you hear a noise and you're like, what was that? Like, you know the sound of something breaking. Like, that's certain sounds. It's like,
but for 100%. And also it doesn't jive, because if this person is so acutely aware of his next door neighbor's schedule, how? Because you're looking outside and seeing, and you're logging, oh, she comes around this time. You're going, what's that? Oh, look, oh yeah, she's got the same car. That's why it sounds the same. Like, I guess one could try to argue that he learned all of this just through his acute sense of sound. But I would suggest that for someone to be this much of a busybody who's paying attention to schedules and stuff like that, he's learning this by watching. Also, what is this man's occupation? Like, what is he doing that he's home all the time? Is it because he's a spy? I don't know, but I'm just suggesting it, alleging, speculating.
I like that. And I would like your spy name to be Baby Girl. Just know that.
Oh God, it would be. Christy Oxborrow, fabulous work as always. What a wild ride. This really is a confounding one. And it's so tragic too. I mean, a woman killed in broad daylight, and it is a completely unsolved murder. It feels impossible.
It does. It's for how many people could have been around in that area. Nobody saw anything. Nobody. It's, again, for me, it's the fact that it was broad daylight.
Yeah.
And I guess maybe at like 11:30 in the morning on a Monday, a lot of people in that area would be at work, but it was broad daylight in a house that she wasn't even living in at the time. It was up for sale.
Yeah.
She mostly lived at her fiance's in another part of town. So it's just wild. But again, he knew her schedule, which was, again, to me, blows the police theory of, well, she was selling her house. How are you even going to know when she's possibly going to be there? It's like, Richard knows.
And if Richard knows, then anyone could know, because everybody's got a price, right? And also it could be another neighbor. If one person knows, anybody could know. If she had that set a schedule, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's like, there's no, again, you're right. I agree with you. It's like, that doesn't prove anything. Like, the house being up for sale proves nothing. Like,
if nothing else, this has taught me, if there's something I do specifically, like the same time every day, like, or same time every week, I'm gonna change it up a bit.
Change it up.
You know, don't always specifically go to the mailbox at a certain time between a certain day between a certain time. Maybe change it up.
Yeah.
Change it up.
Yeah. Well, listen, thank you so much for your work. Exceptional as always. You never cease to amaze and impress.
You are my favorite baby girl.
Thank you kindly. And thank you, dear listeners, for coming with us on this ride. We so appreciate your support. If you haven't already, give us a follow on the socials at True Crime and Cocktails on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, at Not Detectives on Twitter. You also can find us on Patreon at patreon.com/True Crime and Cocktails if you want some bonus episodes, monthly live Q&As, the monthly poll, and so much more. And the only place for official True Crime and Cocktails merch is our merch store, truecrewmerch.com. So check that out if you're interested. Christy, do you want to tell the people about next week's episode?
Oh, I think the honor should be yours.
Oh, well, listen, I am researching, so I guess it does make sense. On the next True Crime and Cocktails, Kim Val. I also just realized as I was listening to this, another female journalist, different kind. She was a different kind of journalist, but also taken way too soon. So come back for that. It is a wild ride. Again, I'm knee deep in research now. So yeah, we're gonna bring the goods, and I'm gonna try and live up to my best girls level as I always attempt to.
You're gonna be amazing.
Bless it. Christy, do you want to say goodnight to the people?
Good night, Taylor Hawkins.
Yeah. Good night, Dave Grohl.